The 2014 Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series, brought to you from Georgia Public Broadcasting. Now, the race for state school superintendent.
Good evening, I'm Claire Sims, all-platform journalist for Georgia Public Broadcasting in Atlanta. We'd like to welcome you and our live studio audience to the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series, originating from the studios of GPB. This is the debate between the candidates for Georgia's school superintendent. Now, let's meet the candidates. They are, in alphabetical order, Valerie Wilson, the executive director of the Atlanta Beltline Partnership and a former president of the Georgia School Boards Association. Richard Woods is an Irwin County school administrator who has worked in various educational positions for 22 years. Now let's meet our panelists. Martha Dalton is a reporter for WABE 90.1 FM. Donna Lowry is the education reporter for 11 Alive News in Atlanta. And Eric Sturgis is a staff writer for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. This debate will consist of 3 rounds. For more information on the rules, please visit atlantapressclub.org. Now let's get started. In the first round, each panelist will question a randomly selected candidate. Eric Sturgis, you get the first question for Valerie Wilson.
You've stated your support for staying the course with Common Core, but some national polls have shown declining support for it, and your opponent doesn't seem to be a fan of Common Core. Why should Georgia stick with Common Core, and what specifically would you do to ensure success?
Common Core is more than a slogan. It is the knowledge base that we expect our children to master in order to be successful in a global economy and to be competitive in that economy. I've traveled this state and I've talked to educators, university presidents, parents, students, as well as the military, and they've all encouraged me to stay the course. Common Core is extremely important for us, and I refuse to delay or reject implementation of Common Core because we are afraid that our children won't be successful in meeting those standards. I am very confident in our children and our educators' ability to master these, and we can't afford not to move forward with them. So we would provide adequate resources and supports to ensure that the training and the professional development that is necessary for our educators to have takes place in the state of Georgia.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Now, Martha Dalton, it's your turn to ask Richard Woods a question.
Mr. Woods, you have supported a moratorium on Georgia's new testing system, Georgia Milestones, which rolls out this year. But if you were elected, you would come into office in January, and the test is in development, and it's scheduled to be rolled out in the spring. So walk us through, how would that work? How do you see the moratorium working if you were to take office? Well,
I think the moratorium itself is a period of evaluation. With the test rolling forward, it gives us the opportunity to actually put all the pieces together. It would also give us time to sit down and talk with our teachers, our administrators, and even our parents, to fully evaluate the system itself. And I think that in looking at the moratorium itself, we're going to have to look at why we test and how we test. One of the things I've looked at, especially in conjunction with the milestones test, is moving away from the end of the course testing at the end of the year, but look more towards a diagnostic approach. And by doing this, we allow our teachers to take the children where they're at and really be more of an evaluation of a physical as they kind of go through, and where they can actually make the changes. And that's something I hope that we can move through, but it does give us a period of really just stepping back and actually taking the time and effectively creating a measure that is very beneficial for Georgia.
All right, thank you, Mr. Woods. Donna Lowry, now it's your turn to ask a question to both candidates.
Both candidates, and we're going to stick with testing on both of these. For Ms. Wilson, the current state school superintendent believes that high-stakes testing, there's too much of it in this state. He's even suggested it's part of the reason behind the Atlanta Public Schools cheating scandal. What are your thoughts on high-stakes testing and why?
I absolutely believe that there is too much high-stakes testing that is going on. And I think that the current reform methods that are in place, and actually started with No Child Left Behind, has led us to this influx of test. And when you do that, you look for instant results. And instant results won't help our children to achieve. I think you have to focus on creating a process and a timeline for ensuring that our children are successful. So you have to make sure that you have the tools and the time for educators to be successful in ensuring our students' achievement. So testing doesn't do that, and I think reform has proven that to us as you look at what is happening across this state.
Okay, for Mr. Woods, let's talk about the recent scores for the SAT in Georgia. We certainly saw a slight drop in those scores, so although more students are taking it, what would you do to improve SAT results?
I think you have to look at the very beginning of the foundation. We look at making sure that our students are proficient at reading by 3rd grade, which should be an emphasis. We have a lot of educational research that supports that, and so I think in the K-5 area that has to be mandatory. And again, moving away from actually teaching to the test, but teaching to the reading level of the child would be first and foremost. Also looking at math. Math is something that is a very questionable thing across the state at this point in time, but we have to have those basic skills in place by 5th grade. So I think first you look at the foundational skills that we have across the board and building on those. And I think doing some things of increasing our literacy across the state. Again, one of my personal goals is to make Georgia the #1 literate state in our nation. And because whatever test you take, one of the things you look at is that you are always having to read. So I think that is the first and foremost process we do, but also increasing the level of our teachers and knowledge that will provide them the educational background to reach each and every child. Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes the first round. We will get back to our panelists in just a moment, but now each candidate will get to ask a question of each other. Now each will have 30 seconds to ask the question and 60 seconds to respond, and then they will follow with a 30-second rebuttal. Valerie Wilson, your question for Mr. Woods.
Mr. Woods, you argue on your website that your leadership would be cost effective. You also argued that Georgia should reject funding from the Department of Education, which provides up to 1/4 of the budget for some rural districts and $2 billion to public education in Georgia. The majority of those dollars fund special education, education to disadvantaged and neglected children, school improvement, and children who live on military bases. Which one of these critical areas do you want to sacrifice and reject funding for in Georgia, and why?
Okay. Well, again, I've never stated that I'm rejecting funding. Again, one of the things I've looked at is that my question the constitutionality of the Department of Education. And again, in conjunction with that, one of the things I've always followed up with is that that money, which is allocated to the Department of Education on the federal level budget, would go back to the states. Again, Georgia is a donor state, and thus, why should we have to compete for the money that we are sending up there with other states? Because I do believe that if we keep the money in Georgia, we can more effectively reach out and also, fund education at the local level where it belongs. And so I think looking at the management, looking at how the federal government has mismanaged resources and perhaps hurt us, whether it's from No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top, those are things we have to look at. And I think with my background as well, I've called for a complete audit of government. I've looked at calling for defending against unfunded mandates and using our money more wisely. And I think that is the prudent stop. Thank you.
Ms. Wilson, you get 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
I find it kind of short-sighted and deeply unfair to put the thousands of children at risk in Georgia for a political soundbite. The state of Georgia relies on those federal funds in order to help us with the $8 billion shortfall that we have received over the last 10 to 12 years. I think that is extremely important that if we're not going to raise taxes to replace that $2 billion shortfall, we have to accept the dollars that Georgians have sent to Washington for the education of our children.
Mr. Woods, it's your turn to ask Ms. Wilson a question.
Okay. Again, Ms. Wilson, how do you feel about the method that the GOD is pursuing to encourage teachers to use the student longitudinal data system?
I think it's important that we do use a data system that allows teachers to understand what is happening with their students in classrooms. I think it's important that we have the opportunity to watch a child as they have grown across the system and to be able to understand where their weaknesses are. I also think it's important that teachers be able to see how students have progressed, but I don't think that we should burden teachers with too many tasks that takes them away from the classroom.
Mr. Woods, your
Again, one of the things you find out that recently what is being asked of our teachers by the Georgia Department of Education and local administration is that they are to visit the site and just to click. And this is just to go click from page to page to page, so that they can get, performance, or at least, say that where they've been to the site. This does not, allow teachers to become effective. It is a complete waste of time. And again, I think we have to look at, instead of gaming the system, provide a system that actually allows our teachers to teach. Thank you.
If you are just joining us, this is the debate between the candidates for Georgia's school superintendent. We will now go to our third and final round. In this round, our panelists will question the candidates until we run out of time. Eric Sturgis, you get the first question in this round.
Mr. Woods, you had mentioned math in your response to a question about SAT scores. Georgia students have traditionally struggled with math. And I was wondering, do you think teachers need more rigorous certification, or what else do you think needs to be done to improve performance in math?
Well, I think, first of all, it establishes a set of standards that actually works. Again, one of the things we have faced in Georgia within the past 10 years or so is that our math standards have changed roughly 3 times. So there has to be continuity with that. But also, I think you have to look at the being developmentally appropriate as well. One of the things we face with the Common Core standards in the area of math is currently as it stands is that the standards themselves are actually driving the methodology. And again, that, puts teachers in a box where they cannot adequately address the learning needs of the children. So I think that's where you have to look at and begin the process of starting it by making sure that we have the set of standards that allows our teachers to teach, but also to give them the background and the time to actually master the standards themselves, writing the curriculum, writing the frameworks as well.
All right, Donna, it's your turn to ask a question.
Ms. Wilson, in recent years we've seen a state school superintendent, elected state school superintendent, without the governor's support, even from the same party. They can't work together. Some think this has hurt the children in Georgia and education in general. And if elected, what would you do to ensure a better working relationship between your office and whomever becomes governor?
Whomever is governor in the state of Georgia, I intend to work hard to make sure that our children in the state of Georgia receive the best possible education. I've spent my career working across partisan lines to ensure that our children are provided with the best quality education as possible. As president of the Georgia School Boards Association, I worked with Republican school board members and Democrat school board members to ensure that we were providing the best possible education for our children in our districts. And I believe I can do that. Education of our children should be a priority of our governor, whether it's a Republican governor or a Democrat governor. And I have had success throughout my career in working across those party lines.
All right, thank you, Ms. Wilson. Martha, it's your turn.
I'd like to hear from both candidates if there's time on this one. Georgia's high school graduation rate is right around 70%. And to increase that number, it obviously takes a lot of work on the ground at schools, districts, that level. But what would both and either of you do if elected the state's top educator to help sort of boost that number?
Mr. Woods, would you like to start?
Sure. One of the things I think we look at is instead of teaching to the test, we teach the child. By doing so, we allow our teachers to adequately prepare our children. We look at also expanding their graduation diploma selection. By doing this, we can do some creative things by, expanding our technical or vocational training, job apprenticeship, STEM, math, science, technology, addressing the needs of our special needs children through perhaps being more IEP driven, which actually addresses the needs of the children. And again, in conjunction with this, as we look at expanding, all of these programs themselves, hopefully we can have a deeper partnership with business, but also looking at the requirements of education. Instead of 4 years of math, which is basically the same for each child, why not let accounting count as a math? Or why not let journalism count as a math? So we offer our kids flexibility and something that they will be definitely driven to do, and perhaps even having, by the end of they graduate, allowing them to graduate with a 2-year degree as well outside of our public education system.
Thank you, Mr. Woods.
Thank you, Martha. I think I know our children present in schools with a host of issues, and those issues have to be addressed before we can begin the job of teaching. I think it's important that we provide wraparound services that address the whole child, and we are sure that we are meeting their needs when they come into our classrooms. I also think it's extremely important that we provide the best professional development as possible to our educators to ensure that the curriculum, and as they deliver curriculum to our students, that they have the skills and the professional development to reach those children. I also think it's important that we reach our children early. If we reach our children early in early child care, which is one of the things that I have really supported throughout my career, if we get to them early and we have children on grade level, there's a higher chance that those children will complete school and graduate. So it's extremely important that we provide wraparound services, that we get to them early, and that we are ensuring that they have the best possible teachers in their classrooms.
Thank you both. Mr. Sturgis, you're up.
Okay. Education leaders and superintendents across the state have complained that school districts are not getting their fair share of the QBE formula. Is it time to replace the formula? And if not, then what solutions would you suggest to try to make it more equitable for school districts? And this question goes to both candidates.
I absolutely believe it's time to either replace the funding formula or simply fund the funding formula. We have never in this state fully funded our QBE formula. So I think it's time that we do that. But if we are not going to do that, I think that we need to sit down and put in place a formula that meets the needs of our rural districts and our urban districts. And as state school superintendent, I would bring together superintendents, school board members, parents, and students together to create a funding formula that does meet those specific needs or those unique needs of those districts. That recommendation I would take forward to the governor and to the state legislature, and hopefully could be funded, because then we would be sure that we are addressing the needs of all of our students across the state.
Mr. Woods?
Well, again, since 1985, the formula, again, has never been fully funded. But I think that not only as we look at the money itself, we have to look at how the money is spent. You know, to give our local school systems the flexibility they need to address the individual needs of their schools within their district. And so that requires bringing all of the educational partners together, you know, parents, students, business, and our local school boards, so that we can sit down together and establish a fair system. But also making sure that as we do that, we reach out and include our General Assembly, our governor as well, and the business community. And thus, by doing so, we can create what is best for Georgia. Again, it is unique, and it's something we have to look at. One of the things I would suggest would be more of a block grant type setting. In that way that each system is given a set of money which they can address and move money around as they reach to improve the education of each child. Thank you.
Thank you both. Donna Lowry, it's your turn.
Okay, this is for both of you. We've heard a lot of talk lately, particularly from educators, on the toll that the poverty is taking on schools. Georgia has the sixth largest, highest childhood poverty rate. So what suggestions would you make to districts about tackling this really difficult problem?
I think that's an accurate description of what is happening in Georgia. When you look in Georgia, 25% of the children who live in the state of Georgia are at or below the poverty level. When you go into rural districts, that number doubles. On my travels, as I have been on this campaign trail, I have been in school districts where 80 to 95% of the students in a district are on free and reduced lunch. What those superintendents and what those educators are saying to me is, we need the support, the funding in order to address the needs of these children. So one of the things that I would do, and I have said this, and I know people say I say it a lot, but funding is critical. Those systems need the dollars in order to make sure that their educators are prepared to provide the instruction to their students that they need in order to be successful. So the first thing that I would do is to really fight to make sure that we have the funding in place to prepare our educators to address those children's unique needs.
Mr. Woods.
Well, I think first and foremost, we need to establish an effective communication system. And that means we need to listen to the local school systems and hear what they say are their needs. And again, by creating a funding formula that actually allows money to go where it is specifically needed. because you cannot just arbitrarily say we need more money or need this, because you can throw good money after bad. And again, many times government has done that. And so we have to look at and make sure that we evaluate what we are doing. And again, that's one of the reasons I've called for an audit of the Department of Education, to make sure that resources are going where they need so that they are being adequately spent. But also having the flexibility of spending as well within our state. One of the things I've encountered throughout the years as an educator was that sometimes technology or pieces of equipment appeared in my classroom, for no rhyme or reason. Also, with looking at some things that a special ed teacher shared with me, said, Richard, I had a supervisor come and say that I had $10,000 to spend, but I told her I didn't need the money. And she says, I don't care, you're just going to have to spend it anyway. So we have to look at how we spend money also.
Okay, thank you both. Martha, it's your turn to ask a question of one of the candidates.
Mr. Woods, I just wanted to sort of nail down your stance on the Common Core. You've said you haven't been a fan of it in the past. You alluded to the math standards being weak. But if you took office in January, Georgia's in the third year of implementation. So how would you approach that? I mean, you couldn't repeal it on your own. So how would you approach the Common Core? What's your stance?
Well, I think, listening to the people of Georgia, that's something that I've done for the past year. And I think the recent polls are showing that my views on Common Core are aligned with the people of Georgia. It is a process where I do have to work with a lot of people, the governor, the General Assembly, local school boards. But I am here to be a representative of the people of Georgia, and I think having that voice. Now, as you look at Common Core itself, I've made no bones that I was an opponent in 2010 when it was connected to the Race to the Top grant, because one of the things I found out and one of the things I look at is that I do not want a common education system. I think our kids and our teachers deserve something more. And really the only thing that I want common is common sense applied to Georgia. And I think in order to do that, we have to make sure that we control education in Georgia. These standards are copyrighted, so I think we have to fight for that. And also looking at the standards themselves to ensure they are the best, and that means reaching out to our teachers and putting a solid plan together. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Sturgis, we have time for one more question.
Okay. This question is to both candidates, and I'll start with Ms. Wilson. Governor Deal has expressed interest in a plan that converts low-performing traditional public schools into converting them into charter schools and moves them from local districts into a state recovery district. What do you think about that idea?
I think that if we are going to put any plan in place to improve instruction in our low-income communities, that plan needs to be a focus on strengthening those community schools and those neighborhood schools. When you look at charter schools and the success of charter schools, there are very good charter schools and there are very poor charter schools. There are very good traditional schools and very poor traditional schools. When you look at the data, 17% of charter schools do better. 37% of charter schools do worse, and 40% are probably about the same. I think it's extremely important that as we move forward, we have our own strategy, and that strategy should be making our traditional public schools the schools of choice in every community. My goal is to have strong neighborhood schools for every child in every community in the state.
Mr. Woods.
Well, I think first and foremost, we want to make sure that all of our schools succeed, and so that this is not the next step in the process. By doing so, this means we must first and foremost, focus on the child. We must be child focused because if we do not focus on the child, education, will fail. And that means recognizing that each child is different and that one size does not fit all. And I think that, as I alluded to before, expanding our graduation, options as far as the diploma selection, expanding, our course offerings as well, such as the journalism and the math that I've talked about, but also, allowing our teachers to teach. Again, that's something that if we are going to change that mindset and have succeeding schools, we've got to allow our teachers to end unnecessary paperwork and data collecting they are dealing with, but also instead of teaching to the test, let's teach to the child. Allow them to once again personalize the education and getting to know their kids. If we can lay the groundwork of this, then the education will take care of itself. Thank you.
Thank you both. That is all the time we have for questions. Candidates will now have 60 seconds for a closing statement. By random selection, Richard Woods is going to make the first closing statement.
Again, thank you to our panel and to our host. It has been a pleasure to be a part of this process for the past year. But as your next state school superintendent, I want to assure you that I bring the necessary experience to the plate. Again, for over 22 years, I did work in the Irwin County school system. And again, I'm the only candidate that has teaching experience and also experience as an administrator. And this is critical because from day one, I have been very active and very vocal on what it takes to be a successful candidate for this office. You know, I have been the individual that has brought solutions and substance to the race itself. And again, looking at the moratorium itself, where people looked and said, well, you can't do it. Well, as I found out with the moratorium, you know, shortly thereafter, Arnie Duncan of the U.S. Department followed, and again with Dr. Barge of our Department of Education here, and even my opponent also fell in line with what I was stating was true. And so we need leadership because there are many things that we face today. And again, I look forward to becoming your next state school superintendent. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Wilson?
Thank you, moderator and panel, for being here today. The State Department of Education is one of the largest departments in the state of Georgia with one of the largest budgets in the state. I have the business experience from managing a department, one of the largest departments at Fulton County with one of the largest budgets and largest staff. I also managed a multi-million-dollar nonprofit entity, so I have the business experience. But I also have the education experience. I led the City Schools of Decatur as its chair for 7 of my 12 years on that board. And we turned the school system around and allowed for it to be successful without teacher furloughs or increasing class sizes or reducing or maximizing our class sizes. It's important that whoever is your next state school superintendent is laser focused on doing what is best for children. I have demonstrated through my service with the City Schools of Decatur that I am laser focused on doing what's best for children. So I would respectfully request your support on November 4th as your next state school superintendent. Thank you.
Thank you both. That concludes our debate. We'd like to remind all voters that the general election will be held on Tuesday, November 4th, and early voting starts tomorrow. Our thanks to both of the candidates and to our panel of journalists. We'd also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club for arranging this debate. For more information about the Atlanta Press Club and all of the debates they are hosting this election season, visit atlantapressclub.org. This debate will be archived there, and the debate will also be available on demand at gpb.org. The Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series is made possible by a donation from R. Charles Loudermilk. Please stay with us for the debate among candidates for Georgia's Attorney General. I'm Claire Sims. Thanks for joining us for the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series.